Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our global audience. I'm Marc Spiegler, Global Director of Art Basel. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before I introduce the talk and the panelists, and to allow a little bit more time for people to come into the Zoom room, a few points of housekeeping. As always, we'd love to hear your questions. Towards the end of the panel, there's a button at the bottom of the screen marked Q&A or some equivalent of that in whatever your language is. You can put in questions there, which we'll take a look at later. If you could, keep the questions, not comments, because it makes it harder for us to find the actual questions. As we have for a little while now, we're offering simultaneous translation in Mandarin. Again, there's a button at the bottom of the screen where you can choose that. Today's conversation is the first of a series of 5 talks that will follow Art Basel's journey from its beginnings in 1970 right up to the present day, the 5 decades of Art Basel. For this first talk, looking at the 1970s, I'm delighted to be joined by 3 guests who are part of the fair from the beginning. The gallerists David Juda and Ursula Krinzinger, if you could wave to the audience, please. And the great collector Ulla Dreyfus-Best. We'll be discussing the sights and sounds of the first fair, the dynamics between collectors and gallerists and artists, and we'll talk about which memories still remain 50 years later. Basel has an incredible cultural history. The Kunstmuseum Basel, which was founded in 1661, is the world's oldest public art museum. But I have to say, and we'll talk about this later, I don't take for granted that in 1969, when the fair was announced, people thought that it was sort of the most obvious thing. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists individually to set the scene, but I thought it would be good to share a few images from our early editions. This is a little bit of an innovation for us, but if we could start sharing the images, that would be great. So this is Trudel Bruckner. Trudel Bruckner was the person who had the idea of doing Art Basel in Basel. She was not an international gallerist. She was a gallerist who really focused primarily on the Swiss scene, on Swiss collectors, but she had an immense love for Basel. And I had the great good fortune to meet her a few years ago before she passed away. And even then, she had an incredible spirit. And she had the idea, having seen Art Cologne, which launched in 1968, that Basel should also have a fair. And she approached 2 other gallerists, Ernst Beyeler and Balz Hilt, to launch the fair, which was known as the Art. On the left side of your screen, you see Ernst Beyeler, in the middle, Trudel Bruckner, to the right, Balz Hilt. All of them were very important. I would have to say that Ernst Beyeler, who at the time was really one of the great gallerists of his generation, someone who really bridged both continents and brought amazing artists to great American collections. I think Beyeler was someone who gave the fair an international credibility and helped it from the beginning to have the kind of pull and globalism. Well, at the time, what passed for globalism, or just to say North America and Western Europe, that made it relevant from the beginning. And also, before I go into the individual speakers, this is the first fair in 1970. For those of you who've spent time at Messeplatz, this fair, and I believe it was the only fair before we moved to the new halls that all of us know and love, this fair took place on the site which is now the Swiss Hotel. As you see, in contrast to the modern minimalist pavilion we have in front of the fair and the large-scale artworks, things were a little bit more freestyle then. And you can also see that when you look at the stands. If we could go to images of those as well. Nowadays, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Here you see the Rundhof. If you could go back one, my bad. We have the Rundhof with the great Dubuffet sculpture, which Ulla informed me what came from Beyeler directly. In the background, if you look closely, you can see a thing that says Neue Tendenzen and Grafikeditionen and Messekino. I know just from my history that Neue Tendenzen was sort of a precursor to Statements. The graphic editions were actually a separate fair on the 3rd floor, and the Messekino is our equivalent now of what art film was, but it was actually on the spot. And I guess in a way, the sculptures in the middle of the Rundhof were a kind of precursor to Unlimited or Parcours. But as you can see, it was a very different world. And now if we could go to the stands, please. It was, there was now, we think of the Art Basel stands as being very spare, very, giving a lot of wall space to all of the works. But as we cycle through these few images, you'll see that it was a very different kind of approach. It was something that, these kinds of stands would no longer be allowed in our fairs. But I think at the time it was very much the beginning. And, we're here to talk today about the beginning. And I'm going to start with David Juda. David, you worked with your mother to open Annalie Juda Fine Arts in a London warehouse space in 1968. And the gallery became known for exhibiting works from Russian constructivism, the Bauhaus, the Distil movements, artists such as Kandinsky and Malevich, and a raft of others. But you've also worked consistently to represent the artists of your time as well. People like David Hockney, whose show you have right now in London, younger American artist Sarah Oppenheimer, Yuko Shirahashi, the Japanese sculptor. And you participated from the beginning, from 1970. Can you tell us what the first few fairs were like as a gallerist, as a visitor?
Yes, certainly the first fair, nobody quite knew what was going to happen. Ernst Beyeler invited us because he knew my mother quite well. We brought everything that we could find. We hung just like the slides show from floor to ceiling. There have been comments made which are partly true, but certainly not at all completely true, that sometimes at the beginning of the fairs we hung very badly, and sometimes today we hang extremely well, perhaps with not such good art. But it was a very interesting time. Nobody really knew what they were doing, and we weren't that successful. The second fair, which was the first fair in the space that is still used today, in fact, a stand roughly at the same place as we have a stand today, 49, 50 years later. We decided on the second fair that we should do something different, not just hang floor to ceiling. So we did a one-person show, which I think nobody had done yet. And we did a show of Christo. And it was the time of the Valley Curtain project, and he was trying to raise money so that he could do his project. This one-person show, and we were very nervous because we have the money to get to the fair properly, and we managed to sell a work the night before, and with that money, using our own lights out of the gallery, which we took out of the gallery, and my mother unpacked and I did the electrical work not very well. But the exciting thing was just before the auction house, and he bought one of the works, and then he said, put a red spot on it, I remember. And we didn't have any red spots, so he went to his gallery and got me some red spots, and we put a red spot on it. And we kept the red, all the spots, and sold everything. It was an incredible feeling and very, very exciting. Lots of our colleagues, such as Ernst Beyeler, bought work, and it was great for Christo. There was a great camaraderie in the first fairs between the dealers, the colleagues, and everybody. Now, a lot more hangs on the fair. So, you know, people take it even more seriously. We were a little bit more relaxed in those days. Hello?
Sorry,
Hello?
Your mother was part of the committee from the beginning, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, we were what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say that?
I'm gonna go to Ursula now. Ursula, you opened your gallery in 1971, if I'm not mistaken. And already in the second year, you were already president of Art Basel, which is something which is unbelievable to imagine now. At the time, you started in Bregenz, and then you moved to Innsbruck, and that was the first year that you were in Art Basel. Since 1986, you've been in Vienna. The gallery has been particularly active in promoting, particularly active in promoting Vienna's actionism, as well as from a very early time, feminist art. And of course, now is very, very actively involved in showing artists from all over the world and for many, many generations. How do you remember your first fairs? What was the experience like? Did you come to Art Basel before you participated, or was it the first time at the Basel Fair as a gallerist? What was the
It has a very special story. I had this gallery in Bregenz where my first exhibition was about Austrian artists who still know Blasnik and Rainer and Gironcourt and so on. And then I had Ursula and Rainer show in Bregenz. And all of a sudden, I got a call from Mr. Zwirner and Mr. Ricke, which was, because these were heroes at that time, which they Zwirner still, and both of them. And they said, oh, we heard about you. Don't you want to join Cologne? And I was so impressed, I couldn't even answer. And then they invited me to participate. And that was the point where I thought I had heard about Basel. And Basel for me, I had spent during my study of art history, time in Basel for research. And Basel was for me such an interesting and important town, because I was just after the Picasso was acquired and the public of Basel had supported it. And so for all of us in the small art scene, Basel could have been really interesting, we thought. And then I applied and they took me in, and that was the beginning in 72 that I came in. And it was interesting because I looked now back, there were 2 years where I mainly showed concrete Kunst, as it was called in this time, and also pencils besides. So already at that time, perhaps later, the booths were worse. But at the beginning, as I had this concrete Rainer in the very, very, very strong paintings, over paintings, all black. Then I had Ulla Dreyfus-Best and Karl Brandl and Gapmeyer, and so they forced me to do it quite nicely. And then in 75, I was so, my stay was in Austria. I was so taken by the Vienna actionism, and because it was prohibited, they had to go in exile to Berlin and so on. And then from 75 on, this was my main, how can I say, my main thing in the fair, to promote them, to show them. But besides, I must say, it was very, very difficult to sell. We did sales, especially later when I did in 76 a solo of Arno Freiner. That was great because really collectors came and understood the work. I had the impression. The scene was very small. And as David said, it was a camaraderie. We went out together, but I think perhaps we can discuss this later. We went out together. The galleries were friends. They were very, you can't compare with now. And so it was a total other situation. There were not so many museums. There were certain museums we were very close to. Then there was also the two curators who came the most to the fair was Seemann and Rudi Fuchs, Harry Seemann and Rudi Fuchs, who supported us somehow. Seemann always liked the actionism, which I turned then into performance. I had shown one of the first female artist show, which was incredible for everybody in 75, where Marina Abramovic and Gina Pan and Vali Export and Katarina Sivading and many more important female artists were in it. And I also brought it to the fair. But this was very strange. Perhaps my position at that time was really that I was extremely interested in content and in the female, in the feminism, and which I still show a lot of female artists. And so it went on, and the rest of the years and the next years were already more professional, because the first ones were really, it had an amateur-like situation, which was very, very impressive also, if we look back today.
Yeah, great. We'll go into more detail on that later.
Yeah.
Ulla, last but not least, is a figure in Basel's cultural scene, and in fact, in the world's cultural scene. She's a board member for many institutions, including the Guggenheim, the Kunstmuseum Basel, the Museum Magritte. There was a wonderful show of her collection, or part of her collection, at the Peggy Guggenheim Foundation a few years ago in Venice. Ulla, you were there from the beginning, and you were living in Basel at the time. I'm curious what it was like for someone who was culturally involved in the city of Basel to have this fair come. How did people in Basel think about the fair coming? What did it mean for the city as it grew in the first few years, in the first decade? How did it change the city? How did the city react to it?
Well, when it happened, we were all very surprised about this new idea of the three gallerists. And I myself, living there and involved with the art all the time, to right, to left, to galleries and shows at the museum, I didn't know about it. Nobody told me. And also, I was very friendly with all three of them, Trudel, Ernst, and Balz. But they didn't want it that it runs around the city already before they have the press conference. And that I understood very well. But when we then in '69 realized that there's going to be an art fair, we hardly couldn't believe it. We were so surprised. And there were many people who had doubts about it. Many, also in the papers. And, but they continued to work on it, and the main pusher on the whole thing was actually Trudel Bruckner. She was the one, not only that she had the idea from the beginning, but she was pushing, and she was positive, and she had initiatives, ideas about, and we didn't know even where to put it at the very beginning. We didn't know where to put the whole show. Finally, the now Swiss Hotel. But the city was half-half. Half was very interested, very intrigued, but interested. And the other half said, oh God, again, that is not going to work. We don't believe in it. And it's thanks to these three people who continued to fight for it. And as we all know, it came out magnificently, fabulously. So this means that sometimes young people, they were not so young anymore actually, but people who have an idea and they work on it, like the startups. It was a kind of a startups in the art world, and not many people believed in it, I can tell you. But the first one, as David said, we were all very relaxed when it really started and when it was there. We were all relaxed, and we went all there. From the public in Basel finally was convinced and thanked everybody that it was such a success. It was already a success from the beginning. Otherwise, there would not be a second one.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, there's the saying that success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. I mean, I have to say, from my perspective, I remember when Lorenzo Rudolph came forward with the idea of doing a fair in Miami Beach. I was extremely doubtful of it. So, and I think obviously we saw how that turned out as well. And I think but also we have to remember that at the time, the whole notion of art fairs was only a year old. There was just Cologne that had happened, Did any of you go to the original Cologne fair in 1968 by chance?
I did go there, yes, because I am original from Cologne, actually. So when I returned to my native city, yes. And one of the big promoter was actually Zwirner, but Father Zwirner, Rudolf Zwirner, not David. Yeah. And he was he did a wonderful show also. He was really involved in the whole thing. And we learned of it. We have to admit, we in Basel, we learned from the Cologne Affair. And this is totally normal. And all from the Cologne, actually, the famous galleries, they came and joined also Basel.
Yeah. I remember, and I won't go into the details, but I remember having a very interesting conversation a few years ago with Rudolf Zwirner about the origins of the Cologne Fair and then the Basel Fair and how the two evolved. One of the things that's amazing when I look back is that the Art Basel Fair in Basel very quickly attained the same size that it has now. It went from a relatively smaller number of galleries to roughly 250, 300 galleries, almost in the space of 5 or 6 years. So, you know, to Ulla's point, there was a lot of momentum very fast. I'm curious, David, you know, why did it develop so quickly? What was it that convinced so many galleries that they needed to do this show?
Well, I think, firstly, Cologne started as a fair for only German galleries and did not promote international. Basel immediately was international. Basel was also a neutral town. Basel was somewhere that people could come from Germany, France, very easily. And it's somehow, a lot of American collectors knew Basel because of Gallery Beyeler and the wonderful museum in Basel. So you had all the nucleus for it to happen. And also importantly, Basel wasn't London or Paris. It was a small town where people came to come to the fair. And this has been its great success. And I think the galleries caught on to this very going to become an international hub. And Basel became really sort of the most important fair pretty early on. It had competition from Chicago many years before, but basically worked at it. They didn't just leave it the fair.
Ursula, Ursula, how do you remember the expansion of the way in which Art Basel grew in those early years?
Of course, I had watched it very well, but I think I must also say that it was thanks to the galleries, because the galleries, they are multipliers, no? We had all the other gallery friends and we contacted them and told them how important Basel could become, that we had met this and this collector, that the museum people came. I think one part is really thanks to the galleries, but it was surprising because at that time I did also Cologne, and in Cologne there was always, you were always told, which was right at that time, that Cologne is the most important fair in the world. That was always pronounced like that. But then when you came to Basel and you had this internationality, where really, as David says, galleries came from everywhere in Europe, plus in the later years, the American came, and I think it developed in a very natural way. Because of the participants helped a lot, and how it was done later, it was more and more professional, more and more press all around. It was something everybody wanted to be. And then later you had also the committee, and you had to be, I mean, before you had also a jury, but later it was really professionalized, and I think everybody wanted to come. But we have to forget that in 73, I think in 73 is Paris opening and 74 Bologna, and they were looking towards Basel very much. I know that because it was always discussed on these fairs how important Basel is, that they want to really to copy it. And that's what everybody did until now.
Ulla, I'm curious, you mentioned Trudel Bruckner before, and unfortunately, none of the founders of the fair, neither Ernst Beyeler nor Trudel Bruckner nor Balz Hilt are with us anymore. Do you have specific memories of them and their involvement with the fair?
Yeah, I want to say something important, because to become Art Basel become international, it is actually thanks to Ernst Beyeler, because Ernst Beyeler at that time, he knew already all the important galleries in New York and in Chicago and also Los Angeles. And that's why he dragged the people from abroad to come to Basel, because for example, there was Sidney Janis and Leo Castelli, and they were there from the beginning, and they were not at the beginning in Cologne. And that is thanks to Beyeler, and he wanted them to come to make the fair international. That's what I remember, and I remember lots of other things. But it is important also that the people who came, they could come. It was much longer open over the day. It started to be 10, not at 11. There were not all these stories about VIPs and important people there. We were all important. We all could come, and we all could buy what we liked.
Yes.
And this was different. And as you remember, David, and it was much more relaxed. And the people, even from the United States, they love to come to Basel, to the little town of something not important except the museums and the people and the directors there.
And then I just said, it's thanks to the galleries, especially Beyeler, of course, but all the other galleries as well. Brought people in, brought other galleries in. I think it was like a new universe developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really always made Art Basel interesting is the degree to which the gallerists are involved. You know, not only the selection committees, which of course choose the galleries that are in the fairs, but also the degree to which every gallery brings its own group of collectors, its own group of museum directors, its own contacts. And in a sense, you know, an art fair is a kind of utopian model where everybody brings all of their resources together, and rather than being afraid of losing out to other galleries, they actually feel like they benefit, that something more happens. And I think it's absolutely true. I'm curious, the 1970s was a very politically fraught decade, much like today is. You know, you had the Vietnam War, you had the Stonewall riot protests in favor of gay rights. You had the IRA, which was active in Ireland, the Red Brigade in Italy, the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany, the Iranian Revolution, the hostage crisis. Nowadays, those kinds of politics spill quite quickly into the fair. Was it the case then as well, or were the two worlds more separate from each other? David, do you want to start with that question?
Well, I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I think politics in the late 60s and early 70s were very important to artists. There's no such thing as a apolitical artist. Artists are political, and art galleries and very important, and they were shown in the way people made their stands and what they showed. The early 70s were, of course, a very difficult time, but also a very exciting time with what was happening in Italy, France, Germany, as you mentioned, and that showed in the fair.
Mm-hmm. Ulla?
Yeah, I think the fact that the political situation was fairly bad, I think that the art fair and the people could focus on something else, which was more pleasant and more fun in a way. And I think there was no influence on the political side to the fairs, also not in Cologne actually. And you forget for about a week, you forget about what happened in the world, which was bad, but the people they liked. And there are some artists, after all, who were impressed by what happened, and they showed it in some of their artworks also. the political terrible things which happened, for example, in Iran. And in Iran, there is a very interesting story at the end, later, when we have another detail.
Let's hear it now, just so we don't forget. Tell me about the Iranian story.
The Iranian story, I don't know if you remember, all of you, that Beyeler made also always one big party, and the party was only exclusively for the gallerists. And some of his friends or some very nice people from the art world. And on three times there was the delegation from Iran coming sent by the Shabuna, Faradiba. And I just happened to know these people. They were in charge to choose art, and they all bought everything from Beyeler, everything. Main objects like Roscoe and you name it, and whatever he had at the, but at the time it was modern art, but already very famous. And he did the parties, but of course they invited his best client at that time, and that was Iran. And don't forget that all the paintings are still alive in a museum of contemporary art in Tehran. You cannot visit it. They don't show it. But if you want, and if you have somebody wants to lend one, they will lend. I have that. That happened also to the Beyeler Foundation, of course, because the paintings, 60% from the painting come from Beyeler.
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing story. Ursula, you have a lot of artists who are very political in different ways. How do you remember the political influence of the 70s upon the fair, upon the works that were being shown, upon the galleries and the audience?
Somehow I wanted to say that the artists, you asked about political approach, they turned it, they worked it up in a different way. Especially the female artists, as I said, Marina Abramovic or Tina Pan, or also Gilbert and George, then Arnold Freiner. If you look, it has a very political side, but they didn't want to do it in a political way. If you go deeper, you will see this disturbance, especially also with Vienna Actionism, with Günter Bruce, Hermann Nietzsche, Rudolf Schwarzkogler, and Otto Mühl. So it was really turned around to another, and it excited people terribly when I showed Nietzsche or Tina Pan when she did a performance on the floor dedicated to death, where worms were put on her head and she was laying there for hours. Or Gilbert and George, the staircase performance. This time I remember very, very well, and it had to do with the political situation, but not directly how you see today. Today you can really see the relation. That was different, but we have not to forget who was really into it were the Fluxus people. They produced works about the Vietnam War and so on and so on. So it was in the art scene, or it was with the artists, but on one side, it was how it's important to change it into another level. I think it was really another level.
Great. Ulla, the 1970s, of course, was this politically fraught decade. It was also the disco era. And I think, Ulla talked before about the parties that Beyeler was having. And I think maybe now more so than ever, we're conscious of the incredible importance of the social aspect of the art world. And I don't mean sort of social butterflies, but I mean that the thing of having dinners with people, getting to know people, having conversations with people face to face. What was the social life of the fairs like then at that point?
Yes.
David, Ulla, go ahead, you first.
Yeah, no, sorry. Well, of course, I was also a part of it, as you know, but Beyeler started to have these dinner parties and very strictly only galleries and some very few people. The after say every day of the fair was not going to discos or to dance or that. It all happened in private homes. It happened also in the home and in the beautiful park of Veronika Burkert. She also had a lot of people, and then later I started myself to have people there, but in another concept, which you know which one that was, but it was created between Sam Keller and me. And it happened only privately, in private homes, in resumes. The people were tired at the end of the day. They wanted to go home, have a shower, and then see the friends or the clients, which came from abroad or from somewhere else. And they wanted to see them, to talk to them, and to have fun. It was much easier. It was not so official, and it was much less official than, for example, afterwards, Miami Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody liked it and had contact. And as you said, they brought their friends, their clients, their curators or museum directors, and they meet together. And the next evening, another one. But there were never really big parties, except the party which was always on Saturday, like later me, also on Saturday, which Beyeler made for the Gallerists.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tradition that we continue now with the Sunday night dinner for the Gallerists at the end of the show. Ursula?
I wanted to say that for us, where we were very young at that time, yeah, so it was totally different. Well, if we were invited, and we were invited to the Beyeler, this was a great thing, because not everybody was invited. And it was incredible. Everybody, oh, you are invited at the Beyeler. That was one side. But in the early years, it was, I hope it's the right name, Happy Night. There was a disco where we all went, and all the gallerists met there. And Harry Seaman was every evening there. And we discussed there, and we were really talking and drinking through the nights. It was a very happy time. One can't imagine, you can't imagine. In the morning, because of affairs, days where not a lot of public came. So we went on into the Jura, had breakfast there, all together, 5 galleries together, and 1-2 collectors, artists, and came back to the fair when it opened. You won't believe that. It was, I thought it was really an incredible time. And what we did forget, I don't know whether David sees it the same, in this early or through the 70s, a lot of artists were present. We all thought, I can only say it for my generation, that the artist had to be here. And for example, I had always sitting some artists here, even Nietzsche and Bruce, and they didn't move, even when a collector came. Today, everybody goes away when a collector comes. It's a total different behavior. That's very, very interesting. So it was a time where all this triangle, gallery artists and collectors, museum directors, was a very, very close one. Also in the nights, I must say.
Yeah. David, how do you remember the Basel nights of your youth?
Sorry, hello?
Yeah. How do you remember the Basel nights?
I was pretty young at the time, so I was a little bit different. I'd go to a club called Happy Night. I would dance through 3 o'clock in the morning. One time I remember being, and I realized that it was 2 men in grey suits who were dancing with me, and I realized that I was dancing with Gilbert and George. But we had great times, and I would come home at dawn, and my mother would be very disapproving because I'd fall half asleep on my stand. But it was a different time. Now I'm quite happy to go to some of the more serious parties.
Yeah, well, good. I'm curious. We're starting to get some questions from the audience, and I want to leave room for some of those. But it's interesting. Ursula, you were talking before about how a lot of artists came to the fairs, and I think they've started again to come to the fairs. But I'm curious, how is the audience of the fairs different then in terms of who came to the fair? Because we have this traditional notion that the fair at the time was very much a commercial place where people bought and sold, but that the broader art world, the curators, the critics, the artists were not so interested. But as I listen to you, it sounds like even in the 70s, it was already kind of a big family reunion of the art world. I mean, how would you describe it?
It was even, I thought it was much more together. It was relaxed, as my colleagues say. It was very relaxed, and you were together, and you never thought, where have I to go in the evening? It's true, later were the private dinners, private invitations, where we also were invited. But I think in the evenings, everybody came to the booths, to the different booths, and you went out together. I think it was a different situation because the art scene was small. There were not so many galleries, and the museum directors who came stayed longer, I have the impression. I have the impression that the 70s meant also, if you say commercial and commercialized, I think it was much more into content and even into theory, even into provoking also, as I have seen it with all the performances that happened besides or happened during the fair. I think it's a very, very important decade for, and I think it could only develop because the 70s were, I don't know, rough on one side, soft on the other. You could, relaxed and not relaxed. I think it was a wonderful time when I look back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ursula, or Ulla, what are your thoughts on how the audience was different, or maybe similar to how it is now? Who came?
I agree with Ursula that it was much more. I confirm it that it was not so commercial at that time in the 70s, like it is now, or like it's the last 20 years. And the people, they were much happier when they found something which to buy and for their collection, and they talked about it, and the audience is more international now, more up to all the younger collectors. The art has become a very commercial item. The people, it's a style. It's almost a lifestyle to collect. Nowadays, I'm talking about now. At that time, it was more personal. It was more engaged. It was more emotional. I preferred the time at that time, I must say. Like also Ursula said about the anti, and she loved it the time. Me too. And you knew everybody. It was much smaller. Everybody knew. You said hello. You had a drink or a coffee or something, and you spoke. It was more a big, huge family.
Right. I'm gonna start taking questions from the audience, and we have some that are building up. One of the questions, to segue off of your point, Ulla, is that at the time it was a smaller world, and people say that really was the kind of the era of the handshake deal, that things were not so complicated in terms of sales. David, do you wanna start with your memories of how different? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was much less complicated, and people would just say, "I'll have it," and that was it. And things are now the financial sums are much larger and so on. But things have changed. I mean, I think there was wonderful times in the 70s. The collecting public was also different. I mean, on the Saturdays and the Sundays, you got all kinds of collectors who were maybe a print collector. It was a bit more serious in the sort of intellectual side. And then on the Mondays, all the gallerists would go around and buy from each other if they'd been successful, which doesn't happen anymore. Things are different, but I think it's okay.
Yeah. Ursula, what's your view on how that part of the transaction, the commerce part, has changed since then?
Yes, it's changed it a lot, but I mean, that's reality. You know, we live to the future, and things will change again in 10 years' time as well.
Yes, they will. Ursula, your view?
Yeah, in the 70s, it's true, because there were not so many collectors, but even museums, they did a handshake, as you said, and then it had to be transported. And imagine, I don't know, as we were very young, and most of our, the galleries who were around me, they transported the art themselves, and even to the museums. We went with our big car and brought the artwork to the museums. It was a total other situation, but you enjoyed it. And then the museum director sat with you and was happy with the painting. And I mean, nobody can imagine. But at the same time, I must say, we couldn't imagine that a time would come where art we were obsessed by, or that we thought that people have to get more involved into art, that this fantastic time came. So we must see both sides, how it developed and where it went to. I think
yeah, I mean,
past times are always glorious times, you know, in your head. At the time, probably, we had also very big obstacles, but at the same time, as a community was so small, it was easier. It was easy.
I'm curious, since we're talking about the financial aspects, you know, we nowadays, we have a lot of people talking about art as an investment. We have a lot of advisors working with the clients. Was that part of the game at all in the 70s? Ulla? Ursula, Ulla, David?
No.
I think the answer is very simply no.
No, that is also my answer. And there was much less competition. Very important.
Mm-hmm. Much less competition as a collector, or between galleries, or in general.
Also between the gallerists. I mean, now it's totally different. Everybody says, and even I sold that for that amount of million and that amount and that. No, there was not so much competition. And then also the gallerists made dealing between them very friendly. And it was a better time. I preferred, honestly, than as it is now. And it has nothing to do with the art fair. It has to do with the people who come and the galleries you do. And it becomes too big, and there are too many art fairs in this world. That's about
I think the current crisis may reduce that, but we'll see over time.
Yeah.
One of the things that's been an interesting development, a positive development of this crisis situation has been a lot more collaboration between galleries. What was the collaboration like between galleries in the 70s? Ursula, you first, and then David, maybe?
Yeah. As Ulla says, the galleries worked together, or even we had works that we sold together, and we shared the result. I mean, it was friends. You were more friends, and there was not this competition. That's true, which was much nicer. Now the competition is too much. That's what I think. Also between collectors and between the galleries, between everybody. It goes, or it went. Perhaps it is changed now, or it will be changed. Everybody thinks now more, but it went in only competition, only going up and simply too much. according to my opinion.
Yeah. David, your thoughts on collaboration? Yeah. Oh, I'm not hearing you well. Another question.
Can you hear me?
So, yes, we can. Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the collaboration in those days was much friendlier. If somebody came and asked me for a work by Arnold Reiner, I would obviously say go and see Ursula. Today, people don't do that so much. But these are changing times, and there weren't that many fairs. There are a lot of fairs now. There will be less fairs, and things will change back. I think the important thing is that people who buy art should buy it because they love it. If it's an investment as well, all well and good. And if that can come back, we'll have got somewhere.
Bravo, David.
Good. From your lips to God's ears. Ulla, I'm curious, I mean, as I've always heard it, at the time, you know, Art Basel, which had always been, and still remains a great place for institutions, was also the center of the gallery scene in Switzerland. Is that correct? What was the gallery scene like in Basel at the time?
Very small, not so important at all. There was really Beyeler first, and then 2 or 3 others like Trudel Bruckner, of course. But Balz Hilt, for example, he did not really have the real gallery. He had tribal art mainly, and I sold something. I bought something there. But he was a friend, and he was very much emphasizing about Basel. He was a real Basel man, like Beyeler, like Ernst, and like Trudel, and that's why he joined the 2 others one. And Trudel asked him, "Would you like to join us in this new idea of a fair?" And he said yes, yes, but he was not so important there. He was not a big gallery. We didn't have much galleries. I went to 2 or 3 galleries, and there was another gallery. There were private people like Karl Laszlo, for example, but he was not a gallery, but you could go there and buy art. I don't know if anybody remembers Karl Laszlo. Maybe Ursula does remember.
Yeah,
I actually was lucky enough to meet him.
Karl Laszlo
Yeah.
very well.
You see, and then there were some people privately, and they sold something. They lived on art, the dealing with art, and but not a big gallery. So it was not the center of the gallery at that time. In the 70s was much more probably maybe Cologne and Paris, and yeah, but in Germany yes, but Cologne maybe much more, but not Basel. And that's why we don't have to forget. It is really thanks to the 3 people, and mainly Beyeler, who created it and who made it run and who was successful in the whole thing.
Yeah. Ursula?
You're totally right. I mean, besides these people, now I think Marc is fantastic. Otherwise, he would not be there such a long time, and everybody in the world knows him. But I think, and that we can't do, we forgot one really important gallery, especially for the contemporary, which is Stampa. Stampa
Yes.
existed in the 70s, and it was fantastic. At that time, it was fantastic gallery. It still is fantastic. Still, they participate, and they have created the best younger Swiss artists that are internationally known. So please don't forget Stampa, because we had to do such a lot. Always when we came to Basel, Stampa helped us. Stampa, we exchanged artists and everything. So I think he was the other very important part of Basel. Don't you think so, David?
Absolutely, absolutely. But there were also other galleries that didn't necessarily have even stands. Like there was Galerie d'Art Moderne around the corner from.
Das ist blöd, dass das nicht geht. Ist so toll. Ist toll.
Yeah. And Von Bartha, I think, opened the same year as the fair as well. Actually, it was through Von Bartha that I was introduced to Karl Laszlo. I remember This is not the moment to try to explain who Karl Laszlo was, but he was really one of those very classical art world figures who had sponsored a great many projects and was sort of not one of the founders of the fair, but also I think brought a very special dimension to Basel with a lot of very crazy projects over the years.
Yes, yes.
I'm curious, there's a question from the audience, and I'll start with Ulla and then I'll go to Ursula and then to David. The question is, if you could bring one thing back from the 1970s to today's Art Basel in Basel show, what would it be? Ulla, what would you bring back if you had a time machine?
What was in the 70s?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I would bring back the more willing not to make only money, and to have another concept of the galleries and the public who comes to see it. I don't know what I would bring back. What I would not like to miss is the unlimited. That was important that was created, but you have that in another conversation, I think. It was much later. But I don't really know what I could bring back. The attitude against this the fair, how the people, but this is not a physical thing. It's not a material. It's a concept. It's the attitude for that, which was much nicer and more friendly. And from that time, I had the best friendships made from, unfortunately, people who passed away already.
Right. Ursula, what would you bring back?
I had the same impression also, friendships from that time. They still exist partly. And I would bring back more time, that people stay longer, that you could, this is my greatest wish when I'm in Basel. It's too quick. I would bring back time, which we were forced now in the last months to think about, and really perhaps a sensibility or atmosphere like it was at that time. But as I said, always past times are glorious. So you only see the glory sometimes, also the bad things glory first. So that's what I think it's time would be fantastic.
Great. David, sorry, last but not least, David, what would you bring back?
I would agree the same. It is very much the friendship. I mean, Ursula, Ulla, I've known now for 50 years. My mother was a great friend of Ursula, and they sat on the committees together. These things are very important, and we need to have that today as well. On a much more light-hearted note, I would say what I really regret or can think back on would be the 50 years and my youth at that time, and at the same time the enjoyment of going to Donati restaurant and so on. But friendship is the most important thing, and looking at art seriously.
Yeah.
May I join something?
Of course.
I think because David spoke about his mother, I hope that we come there, because Annelie, for me, she's still now my icon. I think the gallery I wouldn't have been such long in business. It's now 50 years if Annelie wouldn't have existed. She was an incredible person. She was one of the first female gallerists, and and she was so nice with us, with the younger people, and we developed a real friendship. And even sometimes when David wanted to do something, David, the Miami Fair, the first, you know, the Art Miami we did, you, Meyer, and myself, you said, speak to my mother, she doesn't want me to go to Miami. And I have the same situation. Now, Thomas, my son, comes to stay in Vienna. He did a lot of international business. He comes out to Vienna and will have a big part of the gallery, and we will continue to get a little bit. I know you hate it, David, but still a little bit, and then he will be alone like you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that says it all. It's family, it's art, it's warmth and legacy and continuity. And we've come exactly to the hour point. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. It's been a discussion that, and there we see Lizzie. Lizzie, Ulla's dog, is joining us as well now.
Yes.
Yes, that's our Zoom room moment, you know. Thanks for joining us, the three of you. It's been wonderful. I mean, I've had long conversations with all of you in various parts of the world about this topic. And for me, as a child of two historians, it's just a pleasure to hear the old stories. But I think it's also important to see where we came from and to remember where we came from and to always keep that in mind, you know, because as much as the art world has grown, I think it's the importance of the galleries, the interactions, the importance of content and not just commerce is something that's really crucial for all of us to keep on the radar. If you'd like to revisit this talk, it'll be online soon on the Art Basel YouTube channel. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're going to a summertime schedule, which is not quite as intense. And we're going to start a new series in which we'll be visiting various cities. Just by chance, we'll start with Tokyo. The Yokohama Triennial is opening tomorrow. David, of course, has a very strong connection to Japan, being married to a Japanese artist. And I won't be moderating that one, but I'll definitely be tuning in. I hope you'll be able to join us. Finally, again, thanks to the wonderful panel. I just can't say how amazing it is to have 150 years of our history speaking with us. So thank you again to the audience. We didn't get to all your questions. It always happens. But we hope you enjoyed it, and we're wishing you a great rest of the week wherever you may be. Good morning, good evening, and good night to all of you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.